Good evening, morning, afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you're watching, whenever you're watching, if you're watching. I know that my videos don't get a great deal of engagement, they don't get a lot of views. I'm not Jordan Peterson or uh, Ben Shapiro or anyone of that ilk. With millions of followers, and of course, as always, Candy the Wonder Pop. I see I have one person watching. Wow, thank you. And I have to get this out of the way. So sit and lay down. Speak. Speak. That's better. Up. There we go. Candy is taken care of, and now I see I have nobody watching. Uh, anyway, today is now Friday, the 26th of May, 2023. Got to watch myself. I have a tendency to mix up my years. The last 3 years have blended together, and I'll say 2020 when I mean 2021, or 2022 when I mean 2023. I think it's a function of age. Everything just gloms together. As always, a little bit of preamble. Like, share, subscriptions, all that stuff. Please, you're more than welcome. And it is appreciated, as is engagement, either live while I'm doing it or after the fact. I read all the comments. Not that there are a great many. On occasion, I get a few. But I wanted to talk about the absolute necessity of the need for everyone to get out of their echo chambers. And I think for a lot of people, they don't realize the degree to which the population, particularly in the Western world, countries like Canada and the US and Europe, the way in which we have been herded into our camps, into our tribes, into our little echo chambers. We only interact with people, with those who are like-minded, and it doesn't serve to further the public discourse, the exchange of ideas. A while ago, I'm not going to mention the individual who came out with this, but someone who, from the field of psychology, came out with and it wasn't Jordan Peterson, by the way, came up with this term, mass formation psychosis. And with respect to the COVID era, how it was used to manipulate the population, and how even before COVID, we were already being herded, subdivided, categorized by all. A term you'll often hear bandied about is identity politics. Everything's based on your identity and your group and your categorization. I, myself, let's see, white, male, Christian, straight, and so that's my camp. Canadian, white, male, Christian, rural living. There are all these manners in which political views that we get subdivided and categorized. And when you look at that, before COVID happened, that process was already well underway of subdividing the human population into our little camps, into our little tribes. Then COVID came along, and no longer were we able to get together in a pub or a tavern or a restaurant, or even in a public park. You couldn't go out into a public park. I think a lot of us have forgotten the insanity that we went through over the past, 3 or so years. I was looking back at a video that I had published to my Facebook feed from May of 2021. And at that point, it was May 22nd, 2021, and I was remarking on how for the first time in a while now we could get together in a park, because previous to that you couldn't even play golf in the province of Ontario. In April, May of 2021, golf courses were forced to be shut down. And what happened is a lot of people gravitated toward online. I think most of the population, most adults, teens, already were using social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, whatever. And then with COVID and the restrictions and the shelter in place orders that we were living under, that pushed people even deeper into that digital sphere. And even older people who had stayed away from things like social media and Zoom and WhatsApp and these type of technologies, now those who had stayed away from them embraced them because it was the only way you could talk to people, the only way you could interact, because human beings at our core were social beings for the most part. The overwhelming majority of people are social to one degree or another. We have degrees of sociability, but we're all social beings. And so that further, once you get things happening in the digital world, that allows for surveillance. And what happens now, fast forwarding to our current situation, and I'm assuming that everyone watching my channel, a video that I put out, that they're going to be opposed to a lot of the things that have gone down already and are opposed to a lot of the things they see coming. One example being CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Be opposed to that. They were opposed to the introduction of the vaccine passport and would be opposed to something of that nature being reintroduced, or skeptical views on climate change and the degree to which human activity contributes to climatic change. But what's happened now is the population has become keyboard warriors. And because of algorithms and the way that sites like Facebook and Twitter can throttle content, it pushes us even further into our little echo chambers. Recently, I had some restrictions placed on my Facebook account. I'm guilty of soft crime. I think the wrong things, and I have the unmitigated gall to share my opinions publicly. And so I was given notification that my content is going to be moved lower on people's news feeds for at least the next 90 days, et cetera, et cetera. And then I hadn't done this before, but I looked at my restriction history. I finally found that little tab. I'd looked for it once before, couldn't find it. I found it, and I found out I had a whole huge, on this date, this, on this date, on this date, on this date. It must have been 15 entries where they basically throttled my content. But even without that taking place, even without these restrictions, I'll go and I'll type a message onto Facebook, and I believe that I'm sharing my thoughts, views, and opinions with the world, but I'm not. I'm merely sharing them with people who already, probably 90 to 100%, are in lockstep agreement with myself already. To use a tired old expression, I'm preaching to the choir. An association of like-minded people. And so what happens in terms of the public discourse and public attitudes? The needle doesn't change at all. And for those of us, I see some scary things coming on the horizon. I've shared them before. A few weeks ago, I did a video with 3 predictions. One, declaration of a climate emergency, either specific to a country like Canada or perhaps even globally, with the changes that are being made to the international health regulations, which is a committee within the World Health Organization They have these international health regulations. It's an accord that was signed by member countries in 2005. Now they are updating it, and they could declare a public health emergency over something like climate change, conceivably. It doesn't have to be a pandemic. It doesn't have to be a viral pathogen or something of that nature. It can be something like climate change and if in their wisdom, and the new language of the update, the way they're updating the language of these international health regulations, a great deal of power will be given to the Director General of the World Health Organization. That post is currently occupied by a Dr. Tedros, and I can't pronounce the rest of his name. He has 3 names. I can only pronounce it, and I can only say Tedros. But almost czar-like ability to make a declaration that, because of the global climate crisis and the impact on human health, the following, and previously, according to the 2005 regulations, what World Health was offering were non-binding recommendations, which, as we saw with the COVID pandemic, most countries, most jurisdictions simply followed along. Canada would say, well, it's as per World Health direction. Well, now those, according to the language being amended in this IHR agreement, no longer are they've taken the word non-binding out, which makes one think that they will be binding. So it's a freaky world, and this is something that needs to be discussed. What I like to use the term the public square. But the public square, there's the impression that it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's Parler, it's Telegram, these alternative media platforms. But all they are echo chambers. We're only talking to we're preaching to the converted, and we're a minority. Getting these restrictions on my Facebook account made me curious. When I scroll through my Facebook, I'm only seeing the same people, the same individuals over and over and over again, and they all agree, we're all like-minded anyway. And people I used to interact with regularly before COVID, I went onto my friends list. It's lengthy. Most of the people in my friends list, 3,600, I've never met them. They're people who I've added, or they added me because, I like what this individual's saying. I want to be able to share their content. So I want to see it. So you add them, but I've never actually met them. The people I went to high school with, people who I attended university with, or who I have been in various workplaces with, I went onto their pages just to see, what are they talking about? What are they discussing? Are they talking about CBDCs? Are they talking about climate change? And I get the impression, especially with respect to COVID, is a lot of people have basically, it's a bad dream. They've let it go. They don't want to talk about it anymore. They don't want to, they just want to pretend it never happened. And because you have to remember what happened during that period when in Ontario, Canada, where I live, we had the introduction on September 22nd of 2021. The government of Ontario instituted the vaccine passport. And that meant that an individual such as myself was not allowed to go to a restaurant. I couldn't sit down and have a cup of coffee in Tim Hortons. And I have Joseph Roby, someone who I've interacted with, but we've actually never met face to face, just interacted digitally. And he's saying he's blocked on Facebook and Messenger, just to let you know. Hence why I haven't seen your content. Joseph is something of a lion as well. On Facebook, he has been publishing content uh, heavily centered around faith, something I talk a lot about. My worn out old Bible that I got in 1974 when I entered the third grade. Nice to make me feel old. So how can we get out of our echo chambers? Well, Facebook isn't going to cut it. I would never suggest, I'm not suggesting to anyone, and I'm not personally, saying cut off Facebook altogether. It has its place, but it's not going to move the needle one perceptible iota in terms of the overall generalistic population's attitudes on things. What we need to do is we need to talk to our friends, talk to our family, talk to our coworkers, talk to random strangers we meet on the street. And because getting back again to remember what happened in 2021 when in Canada, and I think it was likewise true. I mean, you saw it on the media, you saw it on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN in the US, and CBC, CTV Global in Canada, that it was drilled into people's heads to hate the unvaccinated. The Toronto Star, which is Canada's largest daily newspaper, on their front page, above the fold, there's an old media expression that most won't even know what it means, but on a broadsheet newspaper, when you got it out of the box, it's folded. So there's the top half of the fold and the bottom half. And the top of the fold is the stuff that would be on display in that newspaper box. So people not even buying the paper would walk by and see. And they had published on their front page a bunch of quotes from people railing and screaming about the unvaccinated and how I don't care if they die. They shouldn't be able to access medical services. I've had it with the unvaccinated there. Yeah. And just giving voice to hatred, division. It was the most disgusting display of, I put it in the category of yellow journalism. It was, you'd think you'd gone into a time machine and we're in 1930s Germany. The hate-filled rhetoric was disgusting, and don't think it can't happen again. And I'm wetting my finger and trying to gauge the direction of the wind. The impression I get right now is we are seeing the population as a whole is being herded in that direction again. I'm seeing too much in the public discourse digitally, belittling those who opted or refused to give in to coercion and fear and decided against rolling up the jabs. To be clear, I'm not a medical expert. I'm not offering medical advice. Try to cover off community standards. I'm talking about the social attitudes toward people who made that choice. And you talk about informed consent, which is a key principle before anyone can be subjected to any type of medical treatment or procedure. There has to be, in the Western democratic world, something referred to as informed consent. All relevant information must be made available, not just the information that pushes in one, leads to one decision, but all the relevant information, all the side effects, all the potentials. And then it's up to the individual to decide, having seen that the full breadth of the situation, then that individual has to be be allowed to make a decision free from coercion. Well, if you don't get it, they're not going to let you vote. We're not going to let you get onto an airplane. We're not going to let you get onto a train and go and visit your family unless you do as we tell you. That can come back. And when it was in place, when someone unwilling to give informed consent, someone unwilling to roll up their sleeve, people were denied, and it's still the case in Canada that some professions are mandated. Not very many, but they do exist. And don't think it can't come back. And will if it does come back, I think it is coming back. And if it does, I think we could very easily see a repeat, and maybe even worse, in terms of the general population's attitude, because the general population's attitude was to punish the unjabbed, to punish them, to force them, make life so unbearable that they give in. And that can happen again. And we need to, part of a goal in marginalizing a population is to dehumanize them. And part of the way you dehumanize a specific segment of the population is to keep them away from everyone else. So if we, those opposed to everything that's going on, just cloister off in our little communities and our little echo chambers, well, we're playing into their hands. So what I'm suggesting is that when you're with your friends, your family, your coworkers, and again, random people you meet on the street or in a store or whatever, have the conversation and a good springboard into it. One thing I find that people are talking about organically anyway is they're talking about inflation. I work in a retail environment now. I have for the past year. I was in the military up until June 1st of 2021 was my last day. Joseph is saying I lost my job. I can't say I lost my job. I got out in front of it in the sense that in December of 2020, when Canada first authorized, they call it an interim authorization, meaning even though we haven't approved this product, we're going to allow it to be administered. The United States called it an emergency use authorization, basically saying that even though it hasn't been approved, we're going to allow its administration anyway. For Canada, we said in the interim. In the US, it was because it's an emergency, basically one and the same. And so in December 2020, when that authorization came down, I knew that in the military it would be forced, that we would have no choice. And so at that point, right in December, right when that interim authorization was given, knowing that it was going to be forced, and it was eventually, I put my what's called a voluntary release in. I said, but I genuinely feel like I can be accused of being a coward because I could have fought it. I could have asked for an exemption, and then if my exemption was denied, which likely would have happened, then I could have been kicked out. But I didn't want to be kicked out. I wanted out on my own terms, so to speak. So when I put in my voluntary release, I just cited, issues at home and the challenges of the military life, and my knee. I have diagnosed arthritis in my knees. It's not horrible, but I have it. And yada, things of this nature, and time for me to go. And so it was approved without any mention of me submitting the release or citing any reasons related to rolling up my sleeve or being unwilling to roll up my sleeve. So what I'm suggesting is that when we're talking to people, friends, family, anyone, a lot of times inflation will come up. People will start talking. I'm in a retail environment now for the past year, and it comes up all the time. People come in and go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe the price of things." And then I will say, "Oh," I say, "I'm convinced it's by design, and it's going to get worse." And that will generally lead into a conversation, and then or just bring it up, and I'll say, "Oh, you know, this is not an accident." I mean, I don't know if you pay attention to the World Economic Forum or not. Some people think it's a conspiracy theory. I don't know why. They meet every year. It's on the mainstream news. Stephen Harper, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, all the world's leaders go to their annual conference in Davos, Switzerland, along with the corporate sector and the who's who, the most wealthy, powerful, connected people in the world all descend on Davos, Switzerland, and they map out how the world should be managed. And, you know, this what's going on right now is by design. I mean, the whole idea of forcing everyone to take this jab, was part of their program, and I refused. I said, "There's no way I'm getting that shot." And I've had people either will react one of two ways. Well, one of several ways, but a lot of people will tell me, "Oh, I'm the same. I didn't take it either. Oh my gosh," and they're thrilled to meet a like-minded person. But we can't. There's a tendency to want to. There's a tendency now that people don't want to offend. I mean, the biggest taboo in society now is, heaven forbid, you should offend anyone. So we talk about the weather, we talk about the NBA, NHL, baseball, Netflix TV shows. We talk about benign, non-controversial things just because heaven forbid you should offend somebody. And you can't discuss anything meaningful. You cannot have a meaningful conversation with anyone unless you're willing to offend, and a person is willing to offend you. I have had, "You didn't get it?" No. And there's one gentleman, he's a neighbor of mine. We had the same conversation. And then he offered up. He said he got it willingly, but he said that he has a lot of respect for those who declined as a matter of principle. And these are the conversations we need to have. Other individuals are like, the conversation ends very quickly. I'm a bad person. And they've been programmed to think of me as poorly educated, knuckle-dragging troglodyte who's threatening the health and safety of everyone. Well, how are you going to change that attitude unless we talk to people? And be kind, be respectful, be engaging, but don't be a shirking violet. Some people you're simply not going to convince. We're not going to move the needle at all on public perception. If my three predictions were a declaration of a climate emergency sometime this summer, then come the fall, a health emergency, most likely candidate being some new strain of COVID that's going to require an updated jab, and they're already working on this. We've already been told in the mainstream that in June of this year, health authorities around the world, CDC, FDA, National Health Service, Britain, the world's health authorities, probably World Health will undoubtedly be involved as well. They're going to identify which strain or strains of COVID are thought, what they predict will be the most virulent and the most transmissible, the most pressing threats. There's the number, it's an alphabet soup of variants now. There are literally dozens. And so they'll zero in on, this is what we're being told, they're going to zero in on 1, 2, 3. I don't know how many you can fit into a jab, They're going to zero in on probably 2 or 3 of them, and then instruct the Modernas, Pfizers of the world to develop a jab that will target those specific variants, and that will be the jab that will be made available to the world's population in the fall, probably September, October. And then I can see it being mandated. And Joseph is saying another pandemic bird, and then the image, a gif of a bird, an eagle, in UK later mentioned. I don't know what you're referring to. I haven't tried to keep up on things as much as I can, but there's just so much information out there, it's impossible to keep up with it. So a bird flu, who knows? Who knows? I tend to think they're going to stick with COVID simply because back in, and this is something I only just learned, as recently as 2018, it was basically accepted scientific fact that developing a jab for any coronavirus was an impossibility, simply because coronaviruses, by their very nature, are too unstable. They mutate at such a high rate that you can never get in front of them. That by the time you get, half the population jabbed, well, there's already a new variant out that overcomes any immunity that might have been generated. And this is, they've been studying coronaviruses since at least the 1960s and weaponizing them as well in Chapel Hill at the University of North Carolina. Obviously, we know, the widely held view about how SARS-CoV-2 originated in the biolab in Wuhan, China. Oh yeah, birds transmitting to the domestic farm animals, crossing to children in UK, Great Britain, two people infected. And sadly, a lot of people are addicted now to fear. They're addicted to drama. And if you want to identify these people, typically they're still wearing a mask even when they're outside. I work with a person of this nature, wears a mask everywhere, even when walking alone to and from work. There's a reason why in Scripture the words "fear not" appear 365 times. We were not intended to live in a condition of fear. Fear robs an individual of the capacity for rational thought. And that's why governments, especially authoritarian style governments, love to promote fear, because they know in the population it gets us to shut our brains off. And we default to fight or flight. And often we fight the wrong enemies, or we flee in fear. So if there's any takeaway from this video, if anyone does watch it besides mon ami Joseph, I'm going to exhort you to talk, and not exclusively on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, Telegram, or any of these social media platforms. I mean, think about Parler and Telegram. People say, "Oh, great! I got a forum where that allows for free speech." Blah blah blah. Yeah, you just got compartmentalized even more pushed to the side, so that you're just in your little echo chamber, which is what they want. They don't want us talking. They want us so angry with each other. So whether you're out walking the dog or at the dog park, or if you're at the mall or at the grocery store or at church, I have these conversations at church, and a lot of the people I attend worship with are all in on the messaging, on the media, on the programming. of what the nightly news programs you what to think, how to feel, what to believe. They tell you what is truth. Journalism has. I was watching an old interview with Walter Cronkite, who was the anchor for CBS Evening News. Throughout the 60s, probably starting in the 60s through the 70s and into the very early 80s. And he was being interviewed by Johnny Carson. And he made the point that proper journalistic training, a journalist, when they're reading the news as a newscaster or interviewing someone, that the viewer, the consumer of the news, is not supposed to know what the journalist's own opinions are. They're not supposed to reveal any bias. They're just simply supposed to present the facts. And if there are opposing views, simply present both sides, giving them equal voice and not siding with one or the other. We don't see that anymore. Now what we see is the media, our supposed journalists, telling us which one to believe and which one not. And well, that's garbage. And quite often they engage in what are called straw man arguments. If they're wanting to show the arguments in favor of rolling up your sleeve and the arguments against, when talking to an individual regarding the advantages or the reasons why you should roll up your sleeve, they will talk to someone who's university educated in the medical field, and they'll present a strong argument. Then the counter argument will be provided by someone with no medical training, who maybe didn't even graduate high school, and that's straw man. Can you find individuals, highly accredited individuals, who can bring up arguments against? Absolutely. But the media won't give them the microphone. The media will get. I saw a prime example of this on CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, state-owned, a crown corporation of the government of Canada. They were looking at a township in Ontario called Malahide Township, south of London, which had one of, if not the lowest rates of vaccine uptake in all of Ontario. And so in enumerating the reasons why a person should get the jab, they spoke to a family doctor and to that region's medical health officer. And then for the counter argument, they talked to a guy who spoke English as a second language, maybe even a third language. And to my ear, he sounded like an Eastern European, might have been Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, whatever. And he was saying, well, I think I wait. I don't know. I see people say reasons why I should get, but then I see other people say reasons I should not get. And that was the guy who they were, that's straw man. Better than a straw man is a steel man. You present when you want to show both sides, you show people who are highly accredited on both sides. It's intellectually weak. And I'll finish off with Joseph's last comment. Same here. He lives in the Philippines. Originally an Canadien, an Acadien. Philippines, breathing barriers, children and adults, restaurants and malls. We're going to talk about the masks. Thankfully, Ontario, there's no mandated masks pretty much anywhere. In certain aspects of the healthcare field, they're still there. I still have this funny thing. It's dirty as hell. Should clean it. But, it's a mask. All the regulations, places that posted the regulations, they said that you have to wear a mask covering and a face covering, and it has to cover your mouth and nose. There you go. Cover the mouth, cover the nose. I'm covered. And you can't object to it. I mean, even if the supposed science that purports that they do work, even if it was true, which I do not believe. But anyway, I actually had to pull this out a few months ago, taking someone to a blood donor clinic. Not a donor clinic, but a blood work clinic where you go to have blood taken. And they were requiring it. So I put this silly thing on, and it was interesting. I got the distinct impression that the majority of the people there wearing them, a couple people didn't. Everyone was just like, oh, well, it's a rule. All right. I think it's stupid, but I'll do it. And I call this passive aggressive compliance. Oh yeah, you can still, Joseph was saying, you can still breathe with that when you can. It's not covering your mouth. It's got this little clip thing. So it sits off your chin. I've got a big nose, but it sits off your chin. And actually, while I was at that blood clinic, a guy sitting behind the desk, he looked over at me and he said, "Sir, you have to put a mask on." And I pointed at it, and the girl working beside him said, "He has one on. He has one of those face shield things." And he didn't look happy, but he let it go. I'm 6 foot tall. I'm 215, 220 pounds. The bulge-shaped head, the goat. I sometimes think that I look a little intimidating, which quickly dissipates when people talk to me, because I'm highly social. And I generally described as a very friendly individual. So anyway, thank you for watching, Joseph. Thank you for interacting. I wish there'd been someone join in with you, but I'm glad you were here. Merci bien. J'ai pas souvent la chance de parler français. On doit faire un autre chat sur Facebook dès que les restrictions imposées sur toi, dès qu'elles sont enlevées. Mais en tout cas, merci bien. God bless. I don't know how to say God bless in French. So have a good night, and we'll talk to you all later.